Uh, let's look at the next section. The next section, they talk about search engines. So you know about search engines already. You know about Google, Bing, Yahoo. Those are your popular ones that everyone knows about. There are dozens and dozens of other less known ones that are listed in the textbook. If you haven't run into them before, they're just as good. Ask.com, Excite, Lycos, Hotbot, Alta Vista, these are all have been around for a long time. Actually, they're not new at all. They're just not popular. People don't use them. Why? Because Google basically dominates the internet with their franchise and Android phones and things like that. So a lot of the internet traffic is done through phones. So that means that everybody kind of uses their search engines that phones are pushing. And browsers is another story. If you have an internet browser, that internet browser is going to push certain searches to you, and you're going to end up on those. So, but there are some search engines that are called meta search engines, and they're a little bit different. I don't know if you understand this or not, but how search engines work. Search engines work based on algorithms. So when you give it a particular topic, it's going to say, it's going to use an algorithm to find that. Any commercial search engine is going to always bring up information that is commercial. Why? Because they make money on it. So, let me show you how, let's say this works. So I'm going to go to Google right now, and right now I'm going to try to Napoleon, right? So what happens if I type Napoleon? What do I get first? Well, first I get Wikipedia, right? Well, we already talked about Wikipedia, so yeah, it already tells me to go to Wikipedia first, which is not the best choice, but there you go. So here's history.com, Napoleon Bonaparte, biography facts. So history.com is probably going to be a little bit better than Wikipedia, okay? But I don't know. History.com is related to History Channel, and History Channel has been talking about ancient aliens and stuff like that. It's not even history at all. I mean, it's like science fiction now. I can't tell the difference between History Channel and Sci-Fi Channel anymore on TV. So I don't know. Maybe not. So there's biography.com. All right. Maybe that's good. Napoleon Bonaparte right there. And look at this, Britannica.com. Now, out of these sources, where do you think I'm going to go? I'm going to go to Britannica.com. Why? Because Encyclopedia Britannica is one of the most reputable sources out there. So if I don't know much about Napoleon and I want to find out the basic facts about Napoleon, just like big pieces, big ideas, who really was he? What did he accomplish? I'm going to go to Britannica.com. That's where I would learn these kinds of things. Okay. So, and then you get, of course, Napoleon grills and things like that. So you get the idea. These are advertising. And then there's videos, YouTube videos. Who knows who put those YouTube videos about? That's entertainment. That's not always information. So I just typed a random topic that came into my head, and all sorts of websites come up. And guess what? Which websites come up first? Well, the ones that Google pushed to the top. These are not the best websites. They're simply the ones that Google wants me to see. Okay. So here's Amazon.com, Napoleon Life. They want me to sell a book. There's videos on Napoleon. So Life Science, National Geographic. Okay, here's another Wikipedia one. So here's PBS.org, pushing their documentary probably on Napoleon. So on and so forth. I'm going to have to, here's a movie about Napoleon from 1927. Again, how good is that going to be? How much helpful is that going to be if I'm studying Napoleon? And I just picked a very broad topic. I could have done something, very narrow, let's put it that way. But basically, this is what happens when you type into a search. The search engine suggests results to you, and those are not necessarily the best results. They're just what the search engine wants to push. And a lot of these results have actually paid money to be on top, believe it or not. So are you getting the most relevant? Are you getting somebody who paid the money to show up. Well, no, you're getting the one who paid the money to show up, because that's what happens with commercial search engines like that. You're going to find all sorts of information. So here's a Facebook. There's something on Facebook about Napoleon. That's a good one. I'm sure Napoleon did not have a Facebook page. But anyway, so there are some search engines out there that I want you to know about. They're a little bit different from Google. You know, they will take you places that Google will not. So here's one of them. It's called the Web Crawler. Okay, and I'm going to do the same exact thing in Web Crawler. And so what shows up here? Here's an ad, and it tells me right there, an ad. So I can just skip these, you know, and not worry about them. And here's my results: Wikipedia, all right, history.com, Britannica. So what just happened? You saw that Wikipedia came up first, history also came up on top, and then Britannica came up third. Well, that changed how, you know, sort of say these things have arranged. You could see that now slightly different results come up. Same search, slightly different results, because I searched a different search engine. So skip the ads and see what else is out there. Okay, more Wikipedia. All right, Napoleon.org, a history website, the foundation of Napoleon. Okay, interesting. Napoleon, Martha Stewart. There's a cake called Napoleon. So it's a very delicious dessert, by the way. So that's what Martha Stewart is talking about. She's not talking about the person. She's talking about food. All right. Napoleon gas grills and loaves. So you could see that I'm not, you know, I'm finding essentially the same resources. But I am searching, and sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes IMDb's movie site. So there's an Amazon again. Watch Napoleon Prime Video, so you can watch a movie about Napoleon. As you can see, that's not helpful. Okay, so here's another meta web search. It's called DuckDuckGo. So that was Metacrawler. This is DuckDuckGo. Let's see what DuckDuckGo will give me. All right. So, wow, Wikipedia is back on top. All right, and history right there, and Britannica right there, and then biography. This identical to the Metacrawler so far. Everything is completely identical to what we got in the Metacrawler, and the Britannica shows up, and the gas grills, and so we're in the same exact territory. Okay. And then there's Martha Stewart again with Napoleon. All right, so let's try another one. So we tried the web crawler. Let's try Metacrawler. Metacrawler.com is another one. Let's see what they come up with. Okay, skip the ads. Basically the same material. More of the same. Different from Google, though. Definitely difficult from Google. Well, the best place that I like to search is Britannica. So I wanted to read up about Napoleon. Here it is. There's all the best facts and contents. And here's my results within the encyclopedia. I can learn so much so fast on this particular topic by simply accessing Encyclopedia Britannica. And that's where I would go. But, you know, of course, you know, Google will take me somewhere else. They're going to take me to Wikipedia instead of Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, Encyclopedia Britannica is a subscription-based software. You're not going to be able to get everything out of it for free. But there's a lot of stuff that you can get for free. Now, I am going to show you another part of Google right here that's really neat. This is a much better one than all of it. So I'm going to go to this section called Books right here. Do you see... I have the search window, and underneath it, it says books. I'm going to go to books, and here are actual books on Napoleon. And remember how I told you to go into the library is really the best idea to start researching topics? Well, here are actual Google books. And Google books, what they do is they take parts of actual books that people have written, and they scan them, and they put them on Google in partial visibility. Sometimes you could see only little excerpts from the book. Sometimes you could see up to 60, 70, or 80% of the whole book. It really depends. So here's a book written in 2018 called Napoleon, the End of Glory. So if I'm studying Napoleon, that might be a good place for me to go. So I'm kind of seeing what the book is. Who published it? Oxford University Press. Wow, this is great. Now, because Oxford University Press published it, I know this is going to be a reputable book. It's going to be scholarly. It's going to be accurate, because anybody who writes for Oxford University Press, if they try to write something inaccurate about Napoleon, there's going to be 1,000 people who are going to tell them they're wrong, and it's never going to get to print. So, so here I have a book published in 2014, and I keep scanning it. Here's the table of contents. And let's say I do find this book, and let's say the information that I need really is in chapter 13. And let's say that Google doesn't give me chapter 13. They only give me, 12 chapters. And the 13th, they're like, nah, go buy a book. Guess what? I can go to the library and find this very book, and I can still get to my chapter 13, because now I found that resource without going to a library. And after this, I can go to the library and get what I need anyway. So here I am scrolling through a scan of actual book about Napoleon. How cool is that? And I didn't go to the library yet. I'm still sitting at home. So here's more books, 2015, Napoleon, a Concise Biography. All right, so if I don't want to go to the book, I just want to clear it out and get the facts right here. Oxford University Press, 139 pages. Here's the name of the author. Here's a little bio about the author, who he is, so I can learn, how credible is this information. Basically, helps me decide it's who I'm getting this information from. So this is a nice little part of Google called Google Books. If you've never used Google Books before, now you know about Google Books. And there's another section that's called Google Scholar. Let's see if I find Google Scholar here. There it is. Google Scholar. Google Scholar does academic articles and things like that. So I'm going to do Napoleon and look at what I've got here. I have a book, Military Maxims of Napoleon. Here's another book. Here's another book. All this information is I can access this online. This is all digital. Okay, Napoleon and English Romanticism. So far, I have lots of books here. Okay, and I can change it to, as I keep looking, there will be articles. I can look at related articles to the book, so I can go like this, and then maybe articles. So it looks like there's here's a scholarly article from a scientific journal that was printed in Russia in 2012. And it's right there. What are the odds? All right. Here's a French text on Napoleon. So it's not even limited to even one language. And that's pretty cool. And I'm just searching through something free. I mean, this is like a library online, okay? And here's a German text from 1971, okay? So depending on what your ability to access and how deep and how far you're going to go, you will never know what you're going to find when you search resources like that. So you do have a lot of meta search engines like the ones I showed you, like Webcrawler, Metacrawler, DuckDuckGo, and you have all of them listed in your textbook. Then you have directories also, and there are virtual libraries that are also listed here that are available that you can access as well. And basically, there's all sorts of online information. Now, like I said, the best information, the most credible information, will be printed information. But even if you are not, able to get to printed information, there's still even digital versions of the printed information that you can access, which is just as good, because it's the same information. It's still credible. It's still good. It's just digitized. Sometimes some information is not going to be digitized. So yes, there's a virtue to a library out there, although libraries become more and more digital every day. And so you can find your topics in various places, depending on how far you want to look. You know, for all, you know, just don't limit yourself to Google and, you know, Wikipedia. Go beyond that. It's an ocean of information out there if you really want to look. Okay, so the authors of the textbook talk about the sources of supporting material, and so we have to evaluate what it is that we're reading. If you noticed, as I'm taking you through these searches, I'm already evaluating those materials. I say, okay, this is a book by Oxford University Press. Oh, this is a popular article, you know, from history.com or something like that. As I look at those sources that come up in my search, I immediately evaluate them. And I'm doing this out loud. I'm just kind of speaking my mind, sort of say, and I do that on purpose because I want you to hear the process of how I go through it. And essentially, that's how we decide which source is best, which source is more trustworthy. So what's out there? Well, there's the general reference works. I'm reading right now on page 81 here. Okay. So general references works would be like a dictionary or encyclopedia. So I like to begin, whenever I study a topic I don't know, or I want to know deeply, I will go into an encyclopedia or a dictionary, and I'll begin there. An encyclopedia and dictionary will give me lots of general information. It'll give me all the facts. It'll give me all the interesting dates and people involved and all the specifics, sort of say. And so I can take those, I can note them down, I can know about them, and then if I want to drill into a particular issue or a particular question related to that general information, then I'll have to look deeper. But at least I already found my base information there, okay? And so the general reference materials are like that, and we have a list of them listed on page 81. Then, of course, we have the newspapers and media. There's all sorts of newspapers online, magazines online. So again, I don't know how much you trust them. I tend to not rely on newspaper materials so much unless I'm looking for questions and topics of popular culture, you know, because to me, they don't really represent the scholarly interest, but that's just me because what I research doesn't really, you know, show up in newspapers. Let's put it that way. And then there's magazines and journals. You know, magazines can be popular magazines like Times or U.S. News and World Report and things like that. You know, it could be, you know, Fortune magazine or something like that, depending on what you're studying. Or it could be a pop culture magazine like Homes and Gardens or something like that. But then there's journals, and journals are more along the lines of scholarly societies that study specific areas of specific fields and different topics that interest their particular groups. Then there's yearbooks and encyclopedias. They're also a good place to start. They're government publications. Don't forget that our government actually puts out a massive amount of information for public use on all sorts of websites. So there's a lot of websites that you're going to see, the .gov, for example, okay? If you want to know about population in the United States, the demographics, you go to census.gov and you'll find out information. Like you want to know who lives in the city of Atlanta, how many of this group and how many of that group and where do they live. Guess what? You can find all of that. You find all of that on the census website. All that information is public. Why? Because the government collects it for the public benefit. They collect it for themselves, but they share it with everyone else. So if you want to know about travel advisors to different countries, for example, you can go to government websites, you know, and there will be, the Department of State will tell you, do not travel to this country because there's a civil war going on. You know, right now Americans are suggested not to travel to this country or that country because they have a revolution or civil war going on, or they have an outbreak of a disease or something like that. So you will see these types of things, and they'll give you basic facts on that country, what you need to do, and all sorts of great information again. So if I want to know about traveling to this particular place, you know, instead of going to, you know, some travel, you know, overseas.com or something like that, I'll go to the Department of State page and check that out. Things like that. If I need to wonder if I need a visa to enter this country, guess where I'm going to go? I'm definitely not going to go to some website that says, travelwithus.com. I'm going to go to a Department of State, or I'm going to go to the embassy of that particular country and see if the visa is required for U.S. citizens, or U.S. citizens do not need a visa and they can just enter freely. I don't know. There's many countries that allow free entry and others do not. So it just all depends. So all of these government publications that can be very, very helpful on studying different topics. There are, of course, biographies about people, and they are very helpful if you're studying a very narrow topic. And then there are collections of different thematic collections that are organized around different topics. Like, for example, Greco-Roman literature. I showed you Perseus Library, a link to a Perseus Library right there on our library website. So if you're studying Greco-Roman literature, then you just go there and you have massive amounts of original texts that you can research and study. That's an example of a thematic collection. Next section talks about finding information through interviews. Yes, you can interview people, but I'm going to caution you at this point. Interviewing somebody takes a bit of skill. You'll have to know the questions to ask. Most of us, when we interview people, we tend to lead them on into an area that we want them to talk about. And we tend to ask questions that guide them in a direction sometimes that we want the answers to be. So things like that. So there's a more objective ways of doing an interview and less objective ways of doing an interview. So interviewing is not that easy, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But it is certainly an avenue where you can get information. You can interview your classmate about life in China or something like that, and you can get some pretty good information from them. And they are a primary source. Why? Because, well, they were born and raised in China, they lived there all their life, and so they should know. Something like that. Basically, you can use interview materials as well for your speech. So that's a helpful section. All right, one more section, and I'm just going to do it really briefly, and then we're going to take a little break, okay? And then we'll wrap it up when we come back after the break. So just one little section. Hang here with me. On page 83, the authors talk about forms of supporting materials. So we're talking about supporting materials, like where you get them. That's good. But then how do you put it together? Like what shape should the information that I found take? Let's say I found that information, but what should it look like in my speech? I found this information about Napoleon, how should I share it? Well, it could be an example, it could be a statistic, it could be testimony, it all depends. All right, it all depends on what you're going to do. So one of the shapes of the information could be an example. So let's say you can make an example from the life of Napoleon Bonaparte of what can happen. Let's say your speech is about ambition. And Napoleon Bonaparte had an amazing ambition. And so you can say, look at this guy. He had this ambition, and look what he has accomplished. He comes from nothing. Because he had this amazing ambition, look what he has done. He became the emperor of France, and so on and so forth. And he conquered half of the world. And you could make an example of his life. And this is where studying Napoleon through like encyclopedia or something like that can be very, very helpful. And you can point to certain parts of his life, and all of a sudden he becomes your example of what a person can achieve, coming from very humble beginnings to and achieving great heights, for example. So I don't know, whatever your speech is about, you can do that. So one of them is, of course, examples, and you can use real examples like Napoleon, or you can use hypothetical examples. That's not also allowed. So just be careful to differentiate between those when you do. You got to be honest with your audience. When you use a hypothetical example, just say imagine, and then launch into your example. When you use a real example, stress that this is a fact of life, and you're talking about a real person, a real place, real time. And so that's the idea. And then, of course, you have, besides examples, you have statistics and testimony. Look with me on page 84. There's a nice little chart that shows you how, in gathering your material, your idea, whatever it is that you're talking about, rests on example, statistics, and testimony. And these are three possible, directions which you can take your material that you've gathered. Examples is, showing something, illustrating something. Statistics is basically giving people data, numbers about a particular, issue that supports your idea. And then testimony, of course, is an example from somebody's life that can, verify what you're saying. So, for example, in the case of us watching the speech of this model, we had testimony that was given to her by her because she is the model. So that's her personal testimony, essentially. And so we find that convincing because she is certainly an expert in her own field. So when you choose your materials, it all depends on your audience. Again, how far do you need to go? How deep do you need to go? How complicated do you need to go? Is related to your audience and related to your topic. But these are the options. These are the building blocks that you can use. Examples, statistics, and testimony. Your idea rests on them. They become your support. That's the shape of the data or the information that you have dug up that now can support your idea. All right. And so when choosing examples, something that the authors highlight that's important to focus on is that you have to ask yourself a series of questions. Sometimes people use an example in their speech, and we have a hard time connecting example to what they're saying. And this can avoid you this particular mistake. Is the example relevant? Is it relevant for me to use example of Napoleon Bonaparte in Speech on Ambition? Yeah, because Napoleon Bonaparte was a very ambitious man. Now, if I'm making speech on compassion and I'm using an example of Napoleon Bonaparte, I don't know. Maybe it's not relevant because I don't know how compassionate Napoleon Bonaparte was. From what I know of him, probably not so much. So is it relevant? Is it a fair example? Meaning, is it an isolated example? Maybe there's some unusual circumstances. Yeah, strange things happen, but they're more of a exception to the rule rather than the rule. So making an example of an exception is absolutely not helping me at all. So it's called an unfair example. Just like saying, just because one person, let's say, overcame cancer by doing such and such thing, for me to use that as an example and say that's what everybody should do, and then you'll avoid cancer too, that's not fair. It's an unfair example. I'm taking one peculiar case, one exception, one oddity, and I'm making it into a rule, and I'm just basically misapplying it. So it's not a fair example. Is it vivid and is it impressive? And that's, you want to use an example that's vivid and impressive. Why? Because usually you use examples to support your idea. You already stated your idea. You don't need to restate your idea again in the same exact ways, but you need to find a way of creatively presenting your idea. So if it's vivid, if it's expressive, if it has the punch, then it works. If it doesn't, then don't use it because it doesn't add anything. You've already said what you wanted. What you need is something that will add value or veracity to your claim. So that's the idea. Will comparison and contrast heighten the impact of your example? So sometimes doing the comparison contrast, like we saw in the speech that the model did, heightens things. It makes things more clearer to us. And so those are good ways of, presenting examples. All right, let's take a quick pause over here just for a few minutes. I'll give you guys 10 minutes. Let's come back, and I'm going to wrap up the end of this chapter. All right. Don't exit. Just stay muted and things like that. And I'll take a little break here and need a drink. I've been talking for a while, so and I'll come back in 10 minutes.
Okay, fine.
All right. Supporting our speech. All right. We so far have looked at supporting our speech with examples, statistics, and testimony. So I've talked about examples. Let me talk briefly about statistics and testimony. So let's see, on page 86 and 87, we have some explanations in our textbook about statistics. What are statistics? Where they basically, statistics are numbers, right? Numbers that show relationship to something, to a phenomena, something we're studying. Relationship usually emphasizes several things. It can emphasize a magnitude, okay, meaning how much something is or isn't, or it can describe subclasses or parts or segments, and then it can establish trends. Those are three things that the statistics usually do. So when we talk about magnitude, we're talking about when something is, there's much of something or there's little of something, or how much, so that's what statistics show, is to what degree is something going on, or to what degree something is not going on. Either way, that's the idea of magnitude. All right, so that's one of the functions of statistics. Segments has to do with how you take little bits and pieces of a particular problem or an issue or information, and you break it down and you analyze that little segment. 5-year-olds within the public school system or something like that. I don't know. It's just like how many pre-K students there are and how many of them are doing this. And so you do a little segment, you just break it down, and then you look at that, things like that. And then the third one is trends. Trends is when you collect the numbers and you say, well, it's trending this way, meaning majority of people are going this way, or a majority of these things are leaning in that direction or in that direction. So that's what statistics does. Statistics is numbers. Can statistics be useful to you in your speech? Absolutely, because numbers, they speak, they prove things. They can be very effective. There's a chart, figure 6.3 on page 88, that's very helpful, that explains to you the difference between magnitudes and segments and trends. If what I said to you just right now by explaining what statistics does not make sense, please take a look at that chart. And there's some concrete examples, and you should be able to take away from those what the difference is between magnitudes and segments and trends, okay? So using statistics, however, it's a little bit tricky. I would say if you do use statistics in your speech, do follow the advice that the book authors are giving you here. So they're writing some really good suggestions. They say translate difficult to comprehend numbers into more understandable terms. So when you're talking about, things, try to bring things down to earth. A lot of times giving people numbers is actually not helpful at all, because some numbers they can't comprehend. Some numbers they cannot, relate to. So you need to round off numbers if it's possible. So instead of, having some odd number, 396,456, just say almost 400,000, and that makes it simpler. So use visual aids to clarify statistics. So if you're going to use numbers, sometimes charts, pie charts, graphs, they are the best when you're trying to present statistics, because statistics sometimes need to be understood visually. Sometimes our ears simply do not comprehend numbers as easily as our eyes do. So anyway, so many people are also visual learners, so that's good. Using statistics fairly, that's a big one. A lot of statistics are not used fairly. They simply are misleading, especially the magnitudes. Can be very, very misleading. So there's a right way and there's a wrong way of using statistics. And so if you're going to plan on using statistics, take the advice that's given to you here in the textbook. You can definitely be unethical and mislead people by simply presenting your statistics in an unfair way, okay? And then the third item is the testimony. As I already said, testimony is very effective. Whoever is giving the testimony should be credible and qualified. If you have a person giving you a testimony who doesn't really know what they're talking about, or doesn't have the credentials to speak for that particular cause or reason or question, then they're not credible. They're not qualified to give testimony. What does make a person qualified to give testimony on a topic? Well, it depends on a topic. They have to have some area of expertise to be credible. If they don't, then they're just anybody else. A lot of times I see people speaking on politics, and sometimes I see Hollywood stars speaking on politics. I don't care what some Hollywood star talks about politics, because who in the world make them an expert in politics? Did they like go to college and learn political science or something? The truth is no. They learned acting. So how does being an actor make you a credible speaker on the issue of politics? It doesn't. So why would I take somebody's testimony about such a matter when they don't have any knowledge or expertise? They're just like anybody else on the street. It's just their opinion. So why should I be convinced of it? Because they're famous, they're rich, that makes them better, that makes them smarter? No, not necessarily. They're just an actor. They're popular. They got, you got more pictures of them published somewhere else. That's all. So you basically have to have a person who is authoritative and qualified. The testimony has to be based on first-hand knowledge. If a person knows something firsthand, that qualifies them in many ways to give the testimony. And then the judgment that expressed shouldn't be influenced by personal interest. So let's say if I'm a bank executive and you ask me a question, what do you think? What is the best bank? What do you think the answer I'm going to give you? My bank. In fact, you should open an account. You get the idea. You have to not be influenced by personal interest. Otherwise, if a person has an interest in saying something, then they're probably saying it because they have an interest in saying it, and they're not being objective. They're pursuing their interest, and that's okay. But you have to judge these things. Some people give testimony, and people say, "Well, why do you say that?" Well, because you are not just a innocent person, a bystander. You actually have an interest in this working out this way. Why? Because it benefits you. So what do you stand to gain? What does the expert or person you're interviewing has to gain by presenting this knowledge this way versus the other way? So anyway, so the person has to be, authoritative, has to be qualified, has to be free of personal interest in the area in which they're being interviewed. And you combine these things together and you have a good, credible testimony. Testimonies could be tricky. Like I said, there are quite a few things to learn about them. Now, the final section here, that I wanted to address, and then we'll wrap things up. The functions of supporting material. Okay, so you have to, if you're presenting complex ideas, you have to find a way to support them, and it's not always easy, and you're going to have to be creative. The controversial idea the idea that to which an audience might be hostile or not agree with you on, you can use statistics and you can use testimony if you can. In other areas, maybe something else will work. So you're going to have to custom tailor different approaches for different topics and different sensitivity areas when it comes to audiences. So supporting materials definitely can help you. They can provide you credibility as a speaker. Person who uses a lot of supporting materials in their speech is perceived by the audience, by listeners, as being prepared and knowledgeable and themselves an expert on the topic. Why? Because they obviously know more than the person who's listening to them. And so they're automatically trusted and believed because they're presenting support. When you don't present support, your point is shallow. You're building it on nothing, just your opinion. That's not good enough for most people. So basically, using examples, sometimes using human interest stories rather than statistics in some speeches is better than others. And other speeches, the statistics and proofs and things like that and hard facts and data is more important. So it really depends on what you're talking about. So if I'm making a speech to convince you to adopt a puppy, guess what? I might use the few statistics, but I'm probably going to use some really sad story about some puppy that was found under the bush, and all of a sudden you're going to feel bad for it and you're going to try to want to adopt it. So it all depends. I can go for the emotion or I can go for something else. And in a situation like that, I'll probably go for emotion. So It all depends. A really quick notice about plagiarism. I assume that you guys know what plagiarism is. Plagiarism is a huge issue. What is plagiarism? Well, in a very, very quick way, it's basically using someone else's words, ideas, facts, presentations, and presenting them as if they were your own. That's it. So the most common form of plagiarism is people simply taking and copying and pasting something from somewhere else. That is the most common form. So people just go click, copy, paste, and then they never say, oh, I got this from so and so. There's not a problem of quoting somebody. It's not a problem of using a source. The problem is that pretending that you came up with this stuff yourself and you're borrowing something word for word from somebody else when you actually didn't write it, you didn't say it, you didn't even think it. It's someone else's saying and thinking and speaking or writing, and you're just borrowing it, pretending that it's your own. That's plagiarism, and that's definitely punishable in the academic realm. So whenever you do use somebody as a source, acknowledge them. Whenever you do quote somebody, acknowledge them. When you got your information from somewhere else, disclose that. You may not need to disclose in the speech. You may need to disclose it in the footnote or something like that, or when you present your outline or something like that, if you do have. Or you can refer to that in the speech. You could say, hey, as you're making a quote, you could say, I've read this in book by such and such, or something like that, according to so and so, and just mention their name. A simple mention of a name of an author where you got this idea from gets you off the hook, so that you're not saying that, oh, I said that. No, it's somebody else said that. It's just they said it really well and you're borrowing it. So just acknowledge them, and that's it. So this is the idea of plagiarism. And plagiarism in speech is just as much can be used as plagiarism in writing. So, for example, the current presidential nominee has been censured for plagiarism in his speech. Years ago, he gave a speech, and it was recorded, and it was word for word lifted from another speech of another politician in a different country a few years back, but it was exactly word for word. That was a good speech, but he didn't write it, and neither did his speechwriters. It was just taken word for word from somewhere else. And because it was documented, nobody had to argue about it. They simply played that speech, and then they played Joe Biden's speech. And they said, who stole it from whom? Well, since this guy said it first, we know that it was Joe Biden who took that, and not the other guys. So, sometimes people do silly things, stupid things, and they get caught in plagiarism, and you can get caught in plagiarism even if you're making speeches and not writing papers necessarily. So, okay. So that's these are the main ideas that I wanted you to have. In the end of this chapter, there's a really great outline, by the way. If you want to learn how to make good outlines for speeches, check that one out. It's a problem solution speech, and it's a really neat outline. And there's nice little commentary on a side where, kind of like I went through the video and I gave you little highlights and explained to you the structure and things what happens the same way. The authors of this textbook kind of dig into an outline and say, okay, this is what's happening here. That's what's happening here. So it's helpful to see the nuts and bolts and the bones, sort of say, the structure. So there you go. That's pretty much the chapter that I want to highlight things for you. We're towards the end. So if you guys have questions, let me know. If something that I went over, too fast or not enough or something like that, please let me know. If there's something that you don't understand in this textbook, you're welcome to ask in the beginning class, the end of class, middle class, whenever you want to.
Thank you. Well, for me, it was, I understood everything. And
Good.
for me, it's a little bit difficult. Well, I haven't made plagiarism
Okay.
in my past. I know what it is, but
Good.
when I was studying in my country, there, well, I don't know in here in the United States, but in my country there used to be like some rules that we have to do in order to, let's say, to mention the book or when it's online and all those things. But I think that it's mainly like when you have to mention or like to um,
Refer.
I don't know, like to think that another person did it, let's say.
Okay. Well, like I said, Nancy, plagiarism, where it applies to writing or to speaking, it's the same way, and it's the same in this country, than from your country. It's exactly the same. There's no difference. Basically, when you're using someone else's words, you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that in conversation with friends, but
Yeah.
when you're presenting
Nobody said
when
that.
you're presenting a speech in class and you're being graded, or you're being evaluated and scrutinized for what you're doing, or you're writing a paper or a book or whatever it is that you're doing, it's a fair thing to say, hey, this is not my idea. I got this from so and so. No shame about it. There is nothing wrong with taking people's ideas and building on them. Guess what? Most things we have in life are built on something else. We are not the first. Nothing wrong with that. Just acknowledge it and you're out of the danger zone, because plagiarism is a pretty serious charge. People get, punished for it pretty harshly. Let's put it that way.
I have a question related to that. I know that at some point we cannot use ideas from another person, but in different words, right? Even if they are, let's say that if I change red to, let's say, red pink, whatever. It's a bad example, I know. But can we, or is it allowed to do something like that, or not at all? Because we can do this, we can say the same things but in different words. But even though I think that any person should be recognized for what they did.
Yes,
So,
it's called paraphrasing. Okay,
exactly, yeah.
you can paraphrase. If you notice, a lot of times when I'm teaching material from this book, I don't say it exactly. Sometimes I read straight out of the book and I just say, this is what the authors say, and then I read it, right there from a paragraph. And other times I paraphrase what they're saying. You see, I say their content in my own words, basically. That's paraphrasing. So you're free to paraphrase, but even when you paraphrase, you still tell people where you got it from. So paraphrasing is not a problem. In fact, most of the time, I want people to paraphrase. Whenever you paraphrase in a paper, if you're writing a paper, you do a footnote. You basically say, this is where I'm getting these ideas from. When you're quoting, then you're giving exact words, word for word, everything they said. That there's a difference between quoting and paraphrasing. But a source is still acknowledged. Whether you're changing the idea, you could still acknowledge that this is where you're being inspired by this person to take it further to the next step. You could still give them credit. There's nothing wrong with that. So in the academic world, that is the proper thing to do. We have rules. These rules are about recognizing other people who have done work. They've done original work. We're building on their original work, and our work is maybe taken at the next level, and maybe it's also original, but we're building on them, so we acknowledge them. So if they were first in something, then we give them that. That's the idea. And sometimes you come up with an idea and you don't realize that somebody else has already had that idea, and that's a different story. It's not plagiarism. It's just that you simply came to the same conclusions, but you didn't know that somebody else came to the same conclusions before you, and that's just not being aware. And that's a different story. But plagiarism is very apparent when it's word for word, it's exact, it's very, very similar. So if you come up with the same idea independently, most likely the words that you're going to express it is going to be very different. And then you're going to be able to show the string of thinking, how you got there, and nobody's going to have a problem with you, But sometimes I get papers from my students and I read them and I know they didn't write them. So it's that simple. They just copied it from internet from somewhere else, trying to fool me. So I've been in this for too long to be fooled. All right. So basically, that's our chapter 6. So you guys move along, move further. Remember what we have on our docket. Look at the lesson plans. So I do have some exercises for you coming up. And eventually we'll get to another quiz and things like that. So it's not a challenging book, it's nothing difficult, but as you work through the structure of organizing your speech and things like that, and finding your sources, you're going to build up these skills. Then the time's going to come for you to start practicing it. And so we'll do some practice speeches. Okay. So it's all in the syllabus. All right. Be well, take care, stay healthy.
Bye-bye.
All right. See you next week.